Today on Sekulow, as the border crisis spirals out of control, we are joined by special guest, U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn, to take on the Biden immigration policy.
Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live.
People who live on the border, they understand the risks and sometimes the chaos that's borne by cartels and smuggling opportunities, and then now this crush of humanity that's rushing across the border.
Phone lines are open for your questions right now. Call 1-800-684-3110.
We need those Trump protocols put back in place. Biden's open border policy has caused this disarray at the border. It is Biden's immigration policy. Joe Biden and his administration have broken the border, and we need to put these protocols back in place.
And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
Welcome to Sekulow. We're taking your phone calls, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Just to go through some numbers with you, we're going to be joined later in the broadcast with U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who's leading an effort to reinstate policies that were working. Reinstate policies that just 4 or 5 months ago, our numbers at the border were, historically low. Let me just give you an example. April 2020. So this is under the Trump Customs and Border Patrol, the Trump border policies, the ending of catch and release, the wait in Mexico policy if you are an asylum seeker. There were only 17,000 total encounters on our border between Customs and Border Patrol and people entering the country illegally. 17,000, very manageable when you think about our entire southern border. Last month, 179,000 encounters. We're at 500,000 already into just the Biden presidency because of reversals of policies. They have changed the policies and just gone back to a status quo that is not working, Dad.
No, it's not working. And, they're so resistant and really refusing to acknowledge that the policies under the Trump administration, including the construction of a fence, a border wall, were working. And the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, if you just look at the empirical data, which is what we do, lawyers do this, political scientists do this. You look at the data and you say, well, that was working. This isn't working. How do we get it working again? And one of the things, which, of course, this administration is just refusing to do, is to put back in place those policies, Andy, that actually worked.
Well, they're even saying the head of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, is saying that we inherited a broken and, dilapidated and unworkable system, which is a lie. It's not an exaggeration to call it an outright lie, because they were working. They were working because you look at the numbers today in 2021, as Jordan said, we had this year 179,000 encounters, 17,000 a year ago in April 2020 under the Trump administration. So something was working under President Trump's aegis, and something is not working here. And don't tell me you inherited something that was broken and not fixed. Not true.
But politically, they're never going to acknowledge that. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
It's bizarre. Politically, they're not acknowledging it. At the same time, though, Than, they're building border wall as we speak. They're going to add an additional 13 miles in the Rio Grande levee.
Yeah, they're acknowledging it tacitly, but they're not doing the things then that would actually quell it. I mean, we're going to talk to Senator Blackburn later. She's got some things, Jordan, that should pass the Senate by unanimous consent, and they're refusing to do it. Here's what I noticed, though, Jordan. What did Secretary Mayorkas say? He says that he wants to construct more pathways to asylum. Jordan, unless you shore that program up, all that means is creating more pathways for that program to be abused, and people who shouldn't be in it entering our country illegally. That's what that means.
It's a crisis that it deserves all of our attention. It affects way more than just people who are on the border. But of course, it does affect those people immediately. But then it starts affecting the entire country. I mean, it's crisis after crisis after crisis with this administration these early months, with with no solutions. Vice President Harris, this is her job. She hasn't been there. She hasn't been to the other countries. She's done a Zoom call. And you've got the Homeland Security Secretary trying to blame the Trump administration, except the numbers were low, handleable. It was no crisis. There was no situation. It was securing the borders, and we did it as a country. We'll take your calls, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. And we'll talk about some of those common sense proposals, also to stop the human trafficking and child trafficking element as well, that are still not getting the support from the Biden administration. We'll be right back.
Biden administration officials insist the border right there, that's not open, that's closed.
So I'm curious what you meant last week when you said the border is closed.
What I meant is precisely that. The border is closed. We are expelling single adults and families under the Title 42 authority.
In April, federal agents encountered the most migrants in 21 years, more than 178,000. That topped March's total.
My agents and I, we live this day in and day out. As someone who sees this, I can confidently say that President Biden owns this crisis. It is his fault.
With a 393% increase this fiscal year alone, last year we had 19,724 captures at this point, and right now we're at 97,398. I simply do not understand how that's under control.
Whether you're just looking at April and May alone, you're probably looking at 25 to 35,000 gotaways, and these are individuals that Border Patrol never encounters. So you don't know who they are. You don't know if they're single adults. You don't know if they are family units, but you also don't know if they're a criminal, if they're a gang member, or even worse, a terrorist or have terrorist connections of some kind.
Our country, in my opinion, we're actually complicit in completing the human smuggling and human trafficking chain into this country. We are complicit, and we've been saying this for a while. The ultimate victors, the ultimate winners here are the cartels on the human smuggling and alone. Right now, because of change in this administration policies, the cartels are looking to get $3-4 more billion.
Taxpayers are on the hook for literally $87 million contracts to house people. So this is a law enforcement problem. It's a national security problem. It's a humanitarian problem. And meanwhile, the Biden administration is planning a trip in June to go to the Triangle countries and I guess give them $310 million in aid. And I'm not sure what that's going to do.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. I think I want to repeat these numbers again because we're being told that our border's closed, everything's fine now, everything is being worked out. We just got these numbers in from April. This is April 2021. Customs and Border Patrol had nearly 179,000 encounters with people trying to enter our country illegally. The month before, 173,000. So over 300,000. You're close to 400,000 in 2 months. We know it's over 500,000 now. The numbers from the previous year, 17,000 in April. March was 34,000. And you can't say, well, 1 year's pandemic, one's not. Both are pandemic. No one's vaccinated. These people are not vaccinated yet. They have not got, it has not trickled down to Mexico. We have no one, we have a Homeland Security Secretary still trying to blame the past administration, but they don't like the policies of the past administration. So even though they worked, they say they were broken because they disagree with them.
Yet they're saying they're willing to build the wall, or at least 13 miles of wall. That we have the bite where Joe Biden said, I will not build well, let's find that before the program's over. I will not build he said, or Director of Policy, Harry Hutchinson, he said, I will not build 1 foot. We will stop, not 1 foot of wall. I think they're about to build, what is it, Jordan? 13
miles.
13 miles.
Well, I think they are forced into building the wall. And Secretary Mayorkas has said that they are focused on root causes and ending root causes to this migration.
I mean, I think our audience would like to know when because they do keep saying it. What does root causes mean?
Well, from my perspective, I completely agree with Mayorkas. The root cause is the reversal of Trump-era policies. And so they need to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. They need to crack down on drug traffickers. They need to crack down on human trafficking. The U.S. government right now is the chief supporter of human trafficking and drug cartels in American history. Why? Because they refuse to enforce the law. So I say to Secretary Mayorkas, enforce the law, and you will find that there will be a lessening of the crisis on the border.
Here's what, remember this famous quote. This is from Vice President Harris. Her root causes, by the way, as you're going to hear in a moment, include climate change.
And then there are the long-standing issues, the root causes. And I'm thinking of corruption, violence, and poverty, the lack of economic opportunity, the lack of climate adaptation, and climate resilience.
Does anybody think that there's one person trying to get into the United States that when questioned, Andy, don't do this, when questioned are going to say, I am here because of climate resilience and climate adaptation?
Yes, that's exactly right. Most of those people who are crossing the border with 6 and 8 children illegally, when questioned by Customs and Border Protection, have said, and they have been asked the question, why are you here? What are you seeking? I cannot stand the fact that in Honduras and Guatemala and Mexico, there is not climate resilience and climate justice. That's another word, and climate adaptation.
I think what we see,
you know what that is? Nonsense.
They're so out of touch. She doesn't want to see the problem either. So they don't want her to actually see the problems. Unlike President Trump, who would go to the border, spend a lot of time down there, understood it was an issue, didn't shy away from it. But, of course, the rhetoric, that was too tough. That rhetoric worked.
Yes.
It scared people who had no business coming into our country illegally from even trying, because they thought, I'm going to end up in prison. I'm going to be sit back. This is not going to be, it's not worth the $5,000 to pay some trafficker to try and get me across, because at best, I'm just going to end up in a prison cell and then back to where I started. And the issue here that is the most troubling is that you've got, the drugs involved, the kids involved, the trafficking of minors, trafficking of children. But of course, they try to lump that in together with 17-year-old males.
Yeah.
We never get it. They have basically shut out the media once again, if you think about it. And we're getting aerial footage of what it looks like on our border. But when you're talking about almost 200,000 people trying to be processed, and these are agencies that they cut the funding for.
So I'm just going to ask this to Colonel Wes Smith. How do you take command and control of a situation when you refuse to go to the scene of the incident, to the theater of conflict?
Yeah. The short answer is you cannot. She does not have command and control. She is absolutely clueless, and I think she wants to remain that way, because if she were to go there and witness this, and cameras are there with her, she would be forced to admit the crisis, what's going on. She doesn't want to do that. People often say that elections have consequences. Well, not only do elections have consequences, Jay, policies have consequences. And what we are witnessing are the dire results, the consequences of poor policies that basically were a reaction. It wasn't what was good for the American people or what was effective. When President Biden came into office, 50 executive orders in the first 2 days because he disliked Donald Trump. It didn't matter what the policy was. He reversed them simply as a reaction. And the American people, as well as the immigrants, are suffering. And we talk about what are the causes. And certainly the conditions in the Northern Triangle countries are part of the cause. But there are other causes of this. One of them is money, because human traffickers and sex traffickers and drug cartels are making billions of dollars. In addition to that, when Mayorkas says that he really, really wants to push forward quickly on a pathway to asylum and citizenship, that is also a cause, because that is like sending an invitation to people to cross the border as quickly as they can.
So the Republicans in the Senate, I know Marsha Blackburn's leading this, she'll be with us later in the broadcast, there's some movement to try to do something here.
Yeah, there is, Jay. I mean, first of all, on root causes, people have been coming to the United States of America for economic opportunity for more than 200 years. That shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. And by the way, a secure border means more of those people legitimately seeking that get in. There are 2 bills right now in the United States Senate put forward by Senator Blackburn, Jay, that would very quickly address some of the most egregious things. One of them would put back in place the Remain in Mexico policy, which I don't think there's an argument against the fact that it was working. That could move through the Senate if Democrats would move it. And Jay, the one that really gets me, I do not understand how this is not passing the United States Senate by unanimous consent. It simply says, if an adult comes to the border with a child in tow, we will do a DNA test to make sure that they are not a trafficker. Jay, how in the world can any U.S. senator oppose that piece of legislation? And yet, as we sit, not a single Democrat on it.
Van, I've been saying the DNA testing for like 10 years. I mean, it's so simple to solve this, but they won't do it.
No, they don't want I don't think they want people to. They don't want the solutions. They like the chaos, and they believe in an open borders policy. Now, this is what an open borders policy gets you when you do have a pandemic, when you do have economic crises around the world, when people aren't able to work, and you want an open borders policy, which, by the way, is no good for the people who actually need to claim asylum. They're not able to get through. So you have to treat everyone like criminals. And that is a problem with your country that's supposed to be a place of refuge, but you can't be one anymore because you want open borders for anybody and anyone who's willing to pay these traffickers a fee. We're going to talk about all this, too, with Senator Blackburn. I want to get to the phone calls. Lane is calling from Colorado on line 1. Hey, Lane.
Hi. How are you doing?
Good.
So I have a question, just something I was a little confused over because I've been doing some research over them saying they're going to rebuild that 13.4 miles. But some of the things that I was looking at said they're not actually going to be rebuilding the wall. All they're going to do is fix that levee that they blasted where they were going to put the wall at. But now all they're going to do is repair that to prevent flooding for those cities that are right in that general area in the Rio Grande.
I think the issue with this, they're never going to admit to ever doing it. They're always going to come up with an excuse. You know, they even tried to do it to President Trump, said he's not actually building a wall. You can actually see this wall being built. And, he's just fixing areas of repair. I mean, yeah, there was a 3-foot fence there. Now there's a 30-foot wall there. I mean, yeah, that's not exactly just repairing. So I think you're always going to hear an excuse, Wes. It's always going to be, we're not really rebuilding. We're not building the Trump wall.
Yeah, and I smiled this morning when I read the reports that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is going to build 13 miles of a levee wall, because I served on the staff of the Corps of Engineers in Washington, D.C. for a while, and I know some of the individuals. I know how most military people feel about border security, and certainly they're going in and they're going to build a levee wall. It will be, to paraphrase Donald Trump, the most big, beautiful levee wall you've ever seen, because they are intending, I think, to prevent flooding and also to provide border security.
But the fact that the administration, the Biden administration, Harry, is so tone deaf to the reality of what's going on there by refusing to even see the tragedy. And then you're trying to offer these solutions that would take decades to implement.
I think the central problem is the Biden administration is unwilling to face the facts right before their own eyes. I think the problem is there for all Americans to see and to understand. Meantime, President Biden continues to hide his face in the sand as the border crisis ramps up to the biggest border surge in 20 years, as inflation rates rise to the highest level in 2008, since 2008 at 4.2% per month. What is the Biden administration doing about all these problems? They are blaming President Trump. And so I think it's up to the American people to start blaming President Biden for our continuing difficulties.
Folks, we're going to continue to take your phone calls, too, and your questions, 1-800-684-3110. I agree. You start looking, you're months away from President Trump, and it's still that's the boogeyman. That's who you've got to blame, because you're not putting your own policies in place to do anything about this crisis.
Over 15,000 unaccompanied minors now in U.S. custody, 5,000 of them with Border Patrol. Immigration authorities still struggling to find places to hold them.
To have 460% spike in illegal apprehensions, over 100,000 people in custody, 13,000 migrant children. This is a historic record.
It went from a non-crisis to a crisis because of Joe Biden's words and policies of his administration. Criminal organizations that are trafficking women, children, families, single adults, the drugs, everything that goes together. The traffickers themselves are earning as much as $14 million a day.
When you create a system that incentivizes people to come across and they are released, that immediately sends a message to Central America that if you come across, you can stay.
The traffickers are smart. Cartels are smart. They know our laws, policies, and this started right after the election. In the last 2 months, we've seen a real surge.
You've got now a crisis at the border where children are being, again, displaced.
And they're only supposed to be there 72 hours. They're staying for weeks plus.
Because there's nowhere for them to go.
If you say our borders are open and there's not going to be real enforcement, well, guess what? There's going to be a flood of migrants. It's exactly what we're seeing.
Why is there not bipartisan legislation dealing with the trafficking element? This is a continuing criminal enterprise.
They have created a humanitarian crisis down here.
Do you have any plans to travel to the southern border, sir? Not at the moment.
These poor, desperate people are now coming, and they're coming in droves, and it is an enormous humanitarian crisis. It's also a crisis for the United States, a national security crisis for the United States. It's tragic to watch what's going on out there each day. It's going to get worse. The policies that we put in place, and it took us many, many months to get them in place, ought to be reinstated. If we do, there'll be a more humane policy. We'll shut down these unlawful pathways, and we won't create the incentive.
That 13 miles, too, that we were talking about, those were 13 miles that were not completed under the Trump administration, and then the Biden administration paused on, and now they've decided to resume. So, again, they will use any excuse not to go back to the Trump policies. Well, ultimately, we're going to talk today to Senator Marsha Blackburn, because what she's proposing, and I will let her explain it more, but what she's proposing is say, put those policies into law. They worked. Remain in Mexico worked. It also allowed us to deal with the actual people seeking asylum. Also, DNA testing, so that we know these children who are being recycled multiple times at the border, 4 to 5 times, that we can figure out.
Thousands of dollars each time it's done.
Yes,
Tens of
because
thousands,
that's
actually.
the key, so that you're not sent back.
Okay. So here is the now president during the campaign, Joe Biden.
Trump campaigned on build that wall. Are you willing to tear that wall down?
No, there will not be another foot of wall constructed in my administration.
There will be not another foot of wall constructed in my administration. Andy?
That's pretty clear. I mean, I can understand English the way I was taught in Dade County, Florida, and I can understand pretty clearly not 1 foot. Well, that's obviously not what's happening, because I agree with Jordan. The levee business is just a bunch of double talk for having to do what the Trump administration knew that needed to be done. But because Joe Biden won't agree that anything that President Trump did was right, he's misleading us again.
But I got a question for everybody. I'll start with Jordan. Okay. Why will they not send Vice President Harris down there?
I think it is a PR disaster. She doesn't handle those situations particularly well. It's a lot of cackling, a lot of laughing, and instead of taking it seriously, it's not going to be explained away with the climate. That's not going to work. So she has literally done Zoom calls.
Yeah.
There are many U.S. senators, including Senator Blackburn. They've done a lot more than our vice president, who has a lot more power to act, because she was tasked by the president of the United States, who has the ultimate power to act in these situations, and to put in policies. That's what we're going to talk about with Senator Blackburn. President Trump didn't have to wait for Congress on a lot of this. He was able to move forward. He had to fight it in court every step of the way, but he was able to move forward. Now what we see, what happens when the Biden team came in and just say, well, let's get rid of all of these policies. But we're not really replacing them with anything different. We're not going to try a new strategy. We're just going to go back to the way things were. And immediately, even during the pandemic, even when you think people would not want to be traveling this way, especially people without the means to take care of themselves medically, are risking it all because because Joe Biden put out the welcome mat.
So then, again, is there any political pushback on her not going?
No, Jay, at least not on her side of the aisle, and here's why. I mean, I think the answer to your question about why she won't go down to the border is a very simple one. There's literally not a single explanation that she could give that the American people, including Democrat voters, by the way, would buy for not addressing the crisis, especially when it comes to child abuse. If she were to go down there, Jay, and not try to give an explanation or try to give one that doesn't make sense for why she doesn't want to stop child trafficking, her voters would not buy it. And, Jay, I will tell you this. I think the members inside the Democrat caucus in both the House and the Senate, I think they know that. I don't think they want her to go because it puts them in a position that they can't defend.
Harry, if you're trying to develop a policy, you develop the policy for the ACLJ. You evaluate the situation. She's refusing to go.
That's precisely correct. So first, I would say the answer to your question is she won't go. Number two, she's more likely than not waiting for the opportunity to go after, for instance, a climate disaster, such as a hurricane, and then she can link the border surge to climate change.
Right.
But third, she doesn't have any good answer, A, to not going, and secondly, on how to improve the situation. She believes, at the end of the day, like most progressives do, in open borders. And so at the end of the day, she doesn't want to offend that constituency, and yet at the same time, she doesn't want to offend common sense Americans who recognize the facts right in front of their own eyes.
Also, the commander-in-chief, the president, has refused to go either. So his lieutenant, so to speak, or general, won't go. Yeah. And the commander-in-chief, the president himself, will not go.
Yeah. It's really, on the face of it, it's pretty unbelievable. I think the reason that Vice President Harris will not go, I think there are a couple of things. One, it would be bad optics, because what's going on there is stark. And people are suffering on both sides of the border, and children are being exploited. So bad optics for her to go there with a camera crew. The other thing, though, I think is accountability. Right now, as sick and weak as it sounds, she has some bit of plausible deniability. She hasn't witnessed it in person. If she went, there would be accountability. She'd have to talk to those Border Patrol agents, and she would be forced to care about it, or at least act like she does, and she's avoiding that.
Yeah, and Andy, we've said this before, but I think it's worth repeating. When we do a criminal case, we go to the scene. You have to.
The first thing you do when there's a murder case is you go to the scene of the crime and you witness it, you look at it, you see it, you see the street, you see the alleyway, you see the curbs, you see the gutters, you see where the trees were, you see where the person encountered the child. You don't say, I'm going to solve this problem by discussing the root causes of murder. I'm going to discuss this about discussing the root causes of burglary. You'd actually go to the event itself, but the way that she avoids confronting it is denying it and putting blinders on, and as Harry said, sticking her head in the sand.
Yep.
I think it's also the disdain for that law enforcement community. This is not a time where they want to be seen as kind of putting more to invest more into law enforcement at a time when so many of their supporters want to defund law enforcement.
Do you think they really want to defund that group?
Yes, I do. Yes. I think that they love this chaos. They like the chaos this is causing in the cities. They like the chaos it's causing. And they're taking advantage of a time, too, where it's like chaos after chaos. We have a gas crisis. We have Middle East conflict. We have the border crisis. And we have a pandemic. This is the first 4 months of this administration. Gas crisis, where it looks like that they did pay the hackers a ransom to get us back on track. A gas shortage, a pandemic, and a border crisis and Middle East conflict, all within just the first 120 days
of this
administration. And I think that he's very absent. I mean, he's going to speak in a few minutes about the oil and gas. It's over now. They paid the ransom and it's flowing again. So it'll be in a couple days. Gas will be back.
Sam, coming up, we have Marsha Blackburn. Jordan is doing a great interview with her on what's going on in all this. So Jordan's going to talk to Marsha Blackburn. So give us a little preview of what she's proposing.
Yeah, well, she's got two bills for starters, Jay, that I think should be passed by the United States Senate immediately. The first one would put President Trump's remain in Mexico protocols back in place. I think that would be a no-brainer. And then the second one addresses the trafficking issue that we've talked about. And it's very simple. It just says if an adult comes to the border with a child in custody, we are going to give them a DNA test to make sure that it's a parent or a relative and not a trafficker. Jay, those tests, they take about 15 minutes. We're not willing to take 15 minutes to make sure that a child coming into our country is not abused and then recycled. That's unconscionable.
All right, folks, we come back. Second half hour coming up. We'll be joined by U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn as well, so you don't want to miss that. And to be on the broadcast, you give us a call, 1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. Check out Wes's piece online, Breaking from Reality on the Border, What You Need to Know. That's up at ACLJ.org as well. Great resources there. And join us for the second half hour of Sekulow coming up next.
Because of your support, because of the support of every member of the ACLJ, one of the practice areas that we've been able to develop is Freedom of Information Act requests, or FOIA requests.
It's thousands of pages of paper, and in those thousands of pages of paper, you usually find a nugget.
Government agencies acting out of control.
We have exposed that in our FOIA litigation, and we do that every day that we bring these cases.
It is your statutory right as an American citizen to have access to documents that reveal how the government is functioning, how your government is functioning.
We took it to the IRS. No one ever does that.
What the IRS was doing was violating the Constitution and statutory law. They can't do what they were doing before.
They've been hiding behind in the shadows. These FOIAs bring them to light.
How do we know? Because our FOIA litigation got that document.
Those of you that support the ACLJ, this is what it's all about at the end of the day.
Think we haven't been on this, folks? We've been on it.
Live from Washington, D.C., Sekulow Live. And now, your host, Jordan Sekulow.
All right, welcome back to Sekulow. We are taking your phone calls, 2-1-800-684-3110. That's 1-800-684-3110. So we're talking about the revised numbers came out today on what's happening at our southern border. So these are the latest numbers, and you can compare them to last year. And you know, last year's number is not nothing. So last year, in April of 2020, there were 17,000 encounters by Customs and Border Patrol on the border. Now, what we know is that in 2020, under the Trump administration, CBP was well funded. They were getting the resources they needed. We were building the walls. We were rebuilding, reinforcing areas that they needed to be. They were not. They were able to deal with the situation that was posed to them. And that's still a lot, though. I mean, 17,000 people. That's not nothing to deal with. But in April of 2021, this year, last month, there were nearly 179,000 encounters. So you add 180,000 encounters by the same people who have less resources. It's unclear what the policies are. They know that they're not enforcing Operation Talon. They're not enforcing the Remain in Mexico policy. They are again. They're seeing the same people over and over again who are being used to traffic in. We're going to talk about with Senator Blackburn in the final segment of the broadcast. She'll be joining us, but I want to talk about it with you all too. And Terry's in California online too. The states that are seeing this, of course, that see it first are the states that are on the southern border, but it affects everybody because people start moving massive amounts of people all over the country and just kind of dropping them off in cities and towns. I mean, it's a humanitarian crisis too. Terry, thanks for joining us. You're on the air.
No problem. Be glad to be here. I just wanted to let you know that in case you all are not aware, locally, we've had migrants placed at San Diego Convention Center, Long Beach Convention Center, and the Pomona Fairplex, which is the LA County Fairgrounds. Now, for those are historians, that's where we held Japanese as an internment camp during World War II. And now our governor is going to do a potential second placement in another part of LA County. So we've got all of these individuals here, but we can't reopen business. And so Biden is now saying, oh, Newsom's doing a great job. Let's do like Newsom. No, don't do like Newsom, which is why we're recalling our governor.
Well, the pandemic, it seems like, Terry, just doesn't apply to if you're an illegal immigrant. And if you're dealing with the border crisis, who cares about masks? Who cares about all this virtue signaling that we still see being done by our political leaders on the left, especially? And I still go back to that Biden joint address to Congress with hardly anyone in there, even though they'd all been vaccinated for months. But yet this crisis, these people aren't vaccinated. They're on top of each other in these facilities. And like she's talking about, Wes, we're talking about convention centers full of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the not vaccinated part should be alarming to everybody who cares about COVID-19. But not only that, frequently in the Biden administration, when people come across the border, they've been so overwhelmed. Normally, if you're not processed right then, you're given what is called a notice to appear. And on the honor system, you're supposed to come back and talk with immigration officials, which, of course, hardly ever happened.
Okay.
But in this case, Jay, they're actually releasing people who are not vaccinated without a notice to appear. Okay. They just say, please come back someday.
Okay. Now, we've been practicing law a long time. Okay, so let me tell you something. You got a defendant. We're not going to subpoena you. We trust you. We know. Right. We trust you. You're going to come back.
I know. You're accused of burglary, murder, robbery, rape, aggravated assault, child molestation. The grand jury has returned an indictment, and you have pled not guilty. Okay. Now, you remember, you got to come back. I'm going to let you go. You're out of jail, but you got to be back here on January 10th for your trial. And don't forget, would you do that? Oh, yes, of course. I'll be here. Don't worry, Judge. You just keep waiting for me. I'm on my way.
But it's even worse than that. They're not even giving some of them a date. They're just saying at your leisure, please come back.
Yeah. Yep. Whenever it suits you, we'd like to see you back here. Would you do it? Sure, I'll do it. I'll be here. Don't worry. Just take your time.
Yeah, this is, again, it's just, we're seeing it, it's over and over again, not dealing with reality, not dealing with the crisis that is being presented to you and that you created. This is Joe Biden's border crisis. It's Kamala Harris's border crisis because they changed policies for political purposes and didn't realize what the ramifications would be. They knew it would not be good, but they don't want to own this. They don't want to own these crises and deal with it. That's a significant problem. We'll be right back.
The American Center for Law and Justice obtaining this email exchange shows that senior Obama-Biden officials held a meeting where a decision was made on what to tell the press about those secret negotiations with Iran that results in the Iran nuclear deal.
Their last claim in this 5-year battle was its presidential privilege. And the judge, I think after this very long battle in court, said, hold on here. I want to see this unredacted and see if what you're claiming is even correct. That judge reviewed this. This is pretty unheard of in the FOIA world, and said, no, you are wrong, State Department. And right now we're waiting. The State Department can either deliver this email unredacted in the next couple of weeks, or they can file an appeal.
Why do you think that they're fighting so heavily?
Was the Obama administration at the time meeting with the Iranians under the Ahmadinejad government? So not the Rouhani presidency, but the Ahmadinejad presidency, which was much more radical, was targeting Americans, holding Americans in prison, carrying out a lot of activities, hostile activities in the region. So if they were doing that and not telling the American people about it.
What consequences are there if that administration was doing so?
Here's the consequences for today. You know, we can't go back 5 years and have them stop going through the JCPOA. We did have the Trump administration get out of the deal. And the Biden administration now with Jen Psaki at the White House, they're having a tougher time getting back into the deal with Iran. So what we want to do at the ACLJ is to continue to expose the lies that surrounded getting into this deal in the first place. You know, the State Department was asked, it was James Rosen at the time, straight up, he asked Jen Psaki in that press conference, is it State Department policy to lie? And her answer was, well, diplomacy sometimes require that we don't disclose everything. You know, very typical Jen Psaki answer. The American people now in 2021 expect to know the truth, especially about deals that have consequences when we're talking about nuclear weapons. All right, so I want you to take a listen. This is Nancy Pelosi. She actually did visit the border, so you could say she actually went down there. But it's the same messaging. This is today. We were just talking about how they want to blame this on anything but the reality of just it's people who are in bad economic situations. That's it. Countries that don't handle their economies are not good. They have never been good. They're not going to be good in a year. You can't fix their economies in a year. You want to talk about root causes? Bad economies, pandemics make it worse. But here again, it's going to be all about the climate. Take a listen. This is Nancy Pelosi today, Bite 35.
What I learned in that more recent visit was that the climate issue and the drought was having such an impact on the agricultural industry there that people lost their livelihoods. They lost their jobs. They lost their ability to farm. And not only were they losing their ability to produce food, they were hungry themselves. So Madam Vice President said that she has engaged the Secretary of Agriculture to be part of that. So it's Vice President, I'm so proud of her, Vice President Harris, but with the resources of the Biden-Harris administration. Get to the root cause of it, reconstruct the system that was there so that it works better.
I don't even know.
I don't even know what she said.
She's usually like, at least you can follow Nancy Pelosi, but even they don't believe their own lies. And they don't believe what they're reading in their teleprompter. They don't read their own bullet points. And when you see bullet points that seem kind of weak or seem like they don't
nonsensical,
they don't follow. Like, how did she get from? So Vice President Harris is doing such a great job. We're going to engage the Secretary of Agriculture because people can't farm in Guatemala. I've never heard that till today.
No.
So that can't be that widespread of a problem if she's the first person reporting
I don't
that.
think I do not think, Van, this is a farming crisis. I think it is a lack of policy and direction crisis in the United States.
Here's what I don't understand about that, Jay. Okay, there's a climate crisis in Central America. So is there no climate crisis in the United States of America? By fleeing here and by coming here, have they avoided the climate crisis? So there's no climate
change. According to the administration, it's like unbelievably bad here.
Right. So, but if there's nothing here, Jay, why are we going back into the Paris Accord? This whole line from Speaker Pelosi it's completely nonsensical.
Well, you couldn't even follow it.
I think you're precisely correct. So I think Pelosi, Biden, and Harris,
right, go ahead.
They have joined together to bury their head in the sand. Pelosi offers, in my judgment, a tissue of lies. She claims essentially that the climate changed dramatically on January the 21st, 2020, but that climate change stopped at the U.S. border, so that those migrants who are driven to come to the United States because of climate change, they recognize that climate change is not happening in the United States. So this is simply nonsense on steroids, and it makes no sense to a rational person, but many of the Democrats can get away with this nonsense because we do not have an honest media.
But it's like she's speaking and nothing's coming out of her mouth. Andy?
Yeah, it's double talk. I mean, I really tried to follow her. She was proud of Madam Vice President, and the Secretary of Agriculture was going to come in. This sounds like a Jackie Mason story is what it does to me. And he's coming in, and they're going to get together, and they're going to talk, and they're going to change the climate. The climate's bad in the United States, but it's not so bad because otherwise people would not be wanting to come in. The climate is terrible in Guatemala. It's better here. No, it's not that great here. You think it's great here? You're wrong. So, I mean, I thought I was listening to Jackie Mason.
Who you like?
Who I love.
It's just they're out of touch. Age catches up when you're trying to spin things, and so these sentences. Just take a listen. Here she is again. This is from Nancy Pelosi by 34.
You had to deconstruct the horrible situation that the Trump administration had created at the border. Deconstruct it so you can reconstruct a better system.
Take apart
and
what
they
was
have.
working, and then rebuild a crisis.
Take apart what was working, implement a climate change policy, and people will stop coming to the border.
I would love to survey those people that are coming to the border, and ask any of them in their own language, clear to them, if any of this has to do with climate change policy or a Green New Deal or higher taxes on, whatever, or if this is just because the economy hasn't been good in Honduras and Guatemala for a few decades now.
Yep.
And if you have a better chance at life in the U.S. where the economy is better, that's one thing you can say than those countries. Then you take the chance, and that's what they're doing right now.
Let's take Richard's call from California.
Hey, Richard, welcome to Sekulow. You're on the air.
Thank you. God's blessings to all you guys. I had two real quick questions. First of all, President Trump had cooperation with these South American countries to hinder some of this. What's happened to that? Number two is all this money, all these years that we've been sending aid to these countries, not only South America, but Asian. I'd like to see, we need to get something for money. They need to watch that money closer because it's not going to the people. The only people that are living high on the hog are the rulers of these countries, as you can.
So let's start with your first one, Richard, which is, what happened to these South American countries? And I think about this in the context of military engagement. So I go to Wes Smith on this, retired colonel in the United States Army, and saying, when you got allies, you work with your allies. Yeah. I'm reading a multi-volume set of Winston Churchill on the Second World War, and I'm on volume 3, and he talks about the alliance. That the alliance is coming together. And President Trump worked on an alliance with Mexico, with some of these other countries. That alliance has fallen apart.
Well, they ended it. What President Trump did is he tied economic aid to these countries mobilizing their law enforcement and their military to police their own borders. They were actually policing their own borders in those countries, trying to keep them from going across the border into Mexico, for example. And President Trump tied economic aid to that. He also took measures to make sure that the money was used for the purposes for which it was intended to stop some of the fraud and the theft. And all of those things were canceled. What the Biden administration is doing, they're back to the conversation of we're going to give you millions of dollars to help you out so that your people will quit coming, and there are no strings attached to it.
We have filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the Department of Homeland Security, with the United States Customs and Border Protection, with the United States Immigration and Customs Enforcement and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. I've just been told by our team that we have not gotten the appropriate response. What a shock. And this will be a lawsuit in the next week to 10 days, another federal lawsuit on behalf of your American Center for Law and Justice to get to the bottom of this problem.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, and I want to get to Barry's call next, because people are really dealing with this. Barry had text on line 1. Hey, Barry, welcome to Sekulow.
Hey, good to be on here.
Thanks. You're on the air.
Okay. Comments about what Pelosi and others are saying about global warming. We live and work here in the border. I'm actually a missionary over in Mexico. And we have visited the migrants on the Mexico side of the border.
Mm-hmm.
And none of the people are saying things about global warming. They're saying the finances. They're not earning enough. They want to earn more, but it's about the same as Mexico.
No, global warming and those ideas and policies are for the wealthy, for the upper middle class and above, because those are people that are dealing with, how do I deal with 20-year, 30-year problems to the globe? The people who are taking these issues are people who are saying, how do I feed my family tomorrow or tonight? They're not thinking 20, 30 years down the road of erosion on the beach, and it makes sense. So, but what doesn't make sense is the politicians saying, no, let me tell you why they're really coming. Don't believe them because they're not making enough money, or there's not enough earning potential, or there's not a future for their kid. Okay, it's things that make sense. No, we're going to tell them, let me tell you what they're really doing. It's really because of a climate issue and beach erosion. That's why that's why they're risking their lives, risking their kids' lives.
Coming up, you're going to speak to Senator Marsha Blackburn, who's got some proposals on this.
Try to do something about it, which is, again, the Biden administration, they are digging in on talking points that make no sense.
Van, do you expect, like with Senator Blackburn's legislation, that they could get some of this through? It's going to be tough?
Well, they certainly should be able to. I mean, the legislation that she has out on trafficking, Jay, it's been out for a couple of months yet, has not attracted a single Democrat support. It's going to take Democrat support. That's the bottom line. Jay, the one quick point I'd make is it's not compassionate to take the people that Jordan's talking about and put them in mass accommodation and convention center. Here's what compassion looks like: a controlled border that would give those people a legitimate legal process that we could actually facilitate and allow them to come here. What's happening now is not compassionate.
No, it absolutely is not.
All right, so folks, coming up next, Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee will be joining us. What should we do with these new numbers that are just coming out? The Biden administration was trying to argue that these numbers were going to be lower. They are the highest in 20 years. That's what our Customs and Border Patrol are dealing with, the highest amount of actual engagements. That does not include the people who are getting across illegally. This is the people who are being caught, who are being stopped. So if that number is this high, and they're that overwhelmed, think about the true nature of how many people are entering this country right now with no structure in place. We'll talk about that with Senator Blackburn. We come back on Sekulow.
Over 15,000 unaccompanied minors now in U.S. custody, 5,000 of them with Border Patrol. Immigration authorities still struggling to find places to hold them.
To have 460% spike in illegal apprehensions, over 100,000 people in custody, 13,000 migrant children. This is a historic record.
It went from a non-crisis to a crisis because of Joe Biden's words and policies of his administration. Criminal organizations that are trafficking women, children, families, single adults, the drugs, everything that goes together. The traffickers themselves are earning as much as $14 million a day.
When you create a system that incentivizes people to come across and they are released, that immediately sends a message to Central America that if you come across, you can stay.
The traffickers are smart. Cartels are smart. They know our laws, policies, and this started right after the election. In the last 2 months, we've seen a real surge.
You've got now a crisis at the border where children are being, again, displaced.
And they're only supposed to be there 72 hours. They're staying for weeks plus.
Because there's nowhere for them to go.
If you say our borders are open and there's not going to be real enforcement, well, guess what? There's going to be a flood of migrants. It's exactly what we're seeing.
Why is there not bipartisan legislation dealing with the trafficking element? This is a continuing criminal enterprise.
They have created a humanitarian crisis down here.
Do you have any plans to travel to the southern border, sir? Not at the moment.
These poor, desperate people are now coming, and they're coming in droves, and it is an enormous humanitarian crisis. It's also a crisis for the United States, a national security crisis for the United States. It's tragic to watch what's going on out there each day. It's going to get worse. The policies that we put in place, and it took us many, many months to get them in place, ought to be reinstated. If we do, there'll be a more humane policy. We'll shut down these unlawful pathways, and we won't create the incentives to risk American sovereignty either.
All right, folks, welcome back to Sekulow. We are joined right now by a very special guest, U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, who is taking this issue head on. I just want to repeat the numbers again very quickly. We have the latest Customs and Border Patrol numbers. In April 2021, there were nearly 179,000 encounters. That does not include the people who escaped encountering any U.S. Border Patrol when they were crossing the southern border. That's compared to in April of 2020. It was just 17,000 encounters, much more controllable. I want to go right now to Senator Blackburn. Senator Blackburn, thanks for joining us on Sekulow today. So we talked about these numbers. We haven't seen anything like this in 20 years, and you've got a new piece of legislation to reinstate President Trump's migrant protection protocols. Why are these protocols so important right now?
Well, we're seeing the reason that these protocols worked right now. It sent a message that we were not going to tolerate people running across our border. And what has happened at that border is Biden's immigration policy. This is his open border policy. He has a Secretary of Homeland Security who does not believe in secure borders. So you have failed immigration policies from the Biden administration that have created a crisis at our border. And that's the story these numbers tell you. When you look at year-to-date numbers, when you look at the comparison to a year ago and see what has happened at that border, basically you have Joe Biden said, y'all come, and the cartels said, you better believe we're coming. And we're coming with drug trafficking, with human trafficking, with labor gangs, with MS-13 gangs, and we're on our way. And what we know is that over 500,000 illegal aliens have been apprehended at the border since Biden decided he was going to repeal President Trump's policy that forced these migrants to remain in Mexico while seeking asylum. So what my legislation would do would stop Biden's decision to catch and release these migrants into our communities, and it would reinstate President Trump's Remain in Mexico program. It will require these aliens that are seeking asylum at the southern border or without proper documentation, and bear in mind, we've got a lot that come without documentation. It would require them to go back to Mexico and to wait for their immigration hearings and proceedings.
And this is, again, I mean, to just for everybody to imagine out there, within months, Senator Blackburn, just off of these bad policies, we're seeing numbers. I mean, 500,000 people apprehended. That's the people apprehended. 170,000 plus a month, month after month after month.
Right. Let me say something right there for all of your listeners, is we're talking about 500,000 that have been apprehended since Joe Biden raised his hand and took his oath as President of the United States. Now, the problem that we hear from all of our Border Patrol, from ICE, from the local sheriffs on the border, is that is the number we know. What we do not know is the gotaways, the ones that did not get apprehended and are now running freely around the country.
That it is just, again, it hurts also. You know, we care about the I know you do as well, the people who are actually seeking asylum, the people who want to wait in line and do the right thing, the people who would wait in Mexico for their hearing because they have a justified reason, to actually wait. But we have a current Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, who is saying it's not our fault the system was broken that we inherited. And can we play it real quick? Let's play it.
Please remember that we inherited a system that was dismantled in its entirety, and we had to really rebuild it.
The system was working. And Senator, that's really at the heart of your legislation. The system wasn't broken. The system was working. The numbers were low. It was something we could actually handle as a nation. It wasn't a crisis.
Well, you're correct about that. The system that President Trump and the Border Patrol had put in place was a system to protect this nation. Now, the Border Patrol has said for decades, we need three things. We need a wall. We need better technology because the cartels are very sophisticated. They're spying on us every day. They're watching our every move. And we need more boots on the ground down here at the border. Now, those three asks of the Border Patrol, President Trump was addressing those. They were giving them more agents. They were giving them better technology. And they were building a wall. And right now, Joe Biden has, everything needed to build the wall panels, the equipment, the concrete. It is all right there laying in the dust at the border. And we're hearing from these ranchers and families and property owners that live there on the border. And they are finding people on their border. Their land is just being ransacked. They are finding out in their property these backpacks that the cartels have people carry. And this is on private property. These are ranchers that are losing the ability to ranch because their property is being torn up by these individuals that are coming on their property. And these are individuals that are trying to run their farms. They are trying to ranch their cattle. And their freedom and their property rights are being violated because the cartels are running people through their property.
We know trafficking is part of this as well, and you've talked about that. I know Than Bennett from our Director of Government Affairs got a question about that too, Senator.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the piece of legislation that you have introduced to address the trafficking issue called the In Child Trafficking Now Act. I know it requires DNA testing of a parent or an adult who enters with a child. Senator, my question, this seems like a no-brainer to me. It seems like something that the Senate should pass by unanimous consent in a heartbeat. Are you hearing from your Democrat colleagues on that bill? To me, that's a no-brainer place to start.
Well, the End Child Trafficking Act is something that, interestingly enough, and as astounding as it is, we can't seem to get bipartisan support on this. It is very simple. It says if you come to our border and you have a child with you who you don't have the documentation to show that that child is related to you, then you have to take a DNA test. This is to protect children because we know that the cartels are utilizing a process that is called child recycling. And in order to get people across the border, what do? They put a child with that adult. Once they are across the border, the child is abandoned. The child has a phone number and address written on their arm, and that child then is returned to that cartel or to that family. There are children that the Border Patrol have seen come through several times. This is child abuse. You can't prove this is your child. You're going to stand for a DNA test. And if you are not that child's parent, you're going to be booted out of this country.
You are fighting for us. I want to thank you, Senator Blackburn, as always, for fighting for us the issues that matter so much. Thank you, Senator. And we'll talk to you next time.
Talking to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We'll talk to you next time on Sekulow.